My mother stopped noticing and respecting me when she got herself a new man, Tom, and his son. Only my grandparents supported me, and after Tom came for help. When my mom married Tom, I thought it would be a fresh start for all of us. My dad wasn't in the picture much, and it felt like maybe having a father figure could give some stability to our messy little family. But the moment I moved into Tom's house, everything felt off. Tom's house was large and spotless, not a single picture frame out of place. It was the kind of house where you worried about leaving fingerprints on the walls or crumbs on the floor. The air smelled of lavender and some antiseptic cleaner that Tom used religiously every weekend. Moving in, I felt like an intruder in my own life, like I didn't really belong. But none of that prepared me for the way Mom changed. Before Tom, she was always there for me. She might have had her flaws, but she always put me first. Now, her whole world revolved around Tom and his son, Adam. Adam was 2 years younger than me, around 16. If you saw him on the street, you'd think he was the perfect kid. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a face that looked like it belonged on a college brochure. But there was something about him, something that just didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way he acted when adults weren't around. The quick smirks, the way he'd say little digs that only I would notice. And Mom? She didn't see any of it. In her eyes, Adam was golden, flawless. It didn't take long for her priorities to shift. Suddenly, every conversation we had was about Adam's school projects, Adam's sports achievements, or how well Adam and Tom were adjusting to our new life. I tried to talk to her about my own school, my own friends, my struggles, but it was like she didn't hear me. She'd smile, nod, and then bring the conversation right back to Adam. It felt like I was slowly fading away in my own mother's mind. One evening, I tried to address it directly. We were sitting in the living room. Mom and Tom was out, and Adam was in his room, blasting music like he didn't have a care in the world. Mom, I feel like we don't talk anymore, I said, cautiously. Like, it's all about Adam now. I miss when it was just us. She looked at me, a little surprised, like the thought had genuinely never crossed her mind. Oh, honey, that's not true. I'm just adjusting. It's a big change for all of us. I wanted to believe her. I wanted so badly to think that maybe I was just imagining things, that this neglect was all in my head. But the truth became clearer with each passing day. The next big hit came on my birthday. Mom had always made a big deal out of my birthdays, but this year, she seemed almost indifferent. I kept expecting her to bring up plans, ask what kind of cake I wanted, something. But the day before, I found out from Adam, not even her, that they'd arranged a family dinner at this expensive restaurant to celebrate, just the four of us. When I walked in, Tom and Adam were already seated, and Mom was beaming, but not at me. She was smiling at Adam, who had just told some hilarious story about his friends. It was like I was invisible. They had even ordered appetizers without me. Then, the waiter brought out a cake, but it wasn't even the kind I liked. It was this fancy, fruit-topped cake that I'd seen Adam eat before. As they all sang, I sat there, watching them celebrate. Well, not me. It was my birthday, and yet the whole night felt like it was all about Adam. The next day, Mom casually mentioned that Adam was having a hard time adjusting too, and she was just trying to make things easier for him. I almost laughed. If anyone was having a hard time, it was me. But of course, she didn't see that. Things got worse when she started spending more time with him than me. She'd take him shopping for clothes, watch his games, even help him with his homework, which was something she used to do with me. And when I tried to bring up my own problems or ask for her help, she brushed me off, saying she was tired or busy. One night, I stayed up late, hoping I'd finally get a chance to talk to her alone. She came home around midnight, laughing, and I realized she'd gone out with Tom and Adam. I waited for her to come into my room, say goodnight, ask how my day was, but she didn't. She just walked straight past my door. I couldn't take it anymore. I went into her room, and she looked at me like I'd interrupted something important. Mom, I need to talk to you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. About us. She sighed, looking annoyed. Honey, it's late. Can't this wait until tomorrow? It's always tomorrow with you now, I snapped. You've changed, Mom. You don't even care about me anymore. All you care about is Adam and Tom. It's like I don't even exist to you. She looked at me, shocked, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to her. But then her face hardened. "You're being dramatic," she said coldly. "Adam's had a rough time, too, and he needs support. You should be more understanding." It was like a slap to the face. I just stared at her, unable to speak. The woman who had once been my rock, my best friend, was gone. In her place was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a nuisance, an obstacle in her new perfect family. From that night on, things only got colder. Mom would barely talk to me, and when she did, it was always in that same dismissive tone, like I was bothering her. I stopped trying to reach out, stopped trying to fix things. I realized that the mom I knew was gone, and no amount of talking would bring her back. Adam, of course, saw all of this and took full advantage. He'd throw little digs my way when Mom wasn't looking, make snide comments about how I was jealous and needed to grow up, and every time I tried to call him out, he'd twist things around to make me look like the bad guy. Mom believed him every single time. One night, I heard them laughing downstairs. I crept down, hoping to catch a glimpse of this perfect family moment. They were playing a board game, something we used to do together. But this time, it was just them. They didn't even ask if I wanted to join. As I watched, a painful realization settled over me. My mom had chosen them over me. Her new husband, her new perfect son. They had replaced me in her heart. I wasn't her priority anymore. I was just an afterthought, a piece of her old life that she'd outgrown. After that, I stopped trying to connect with her. I stopped asking her for help, stopped sharing my life with her. It was pointless. She had her new family, and I was just an outsider. In the quiet of my room, I mourned the relationship we used to have, the mother who used to care about me. But that version of her was gone, replaced by someone who didn't seem to notice or care that she'd abandoned her own son. And somehow, the worst part was that she seemed perfectly happy without me. Since Mom remarried, life had been unfair. That word felt almost too mild for what it actually was, but it was the best I could think of. I went from being her son to being a shadow that lurked in the background, a mere echo in a household that didn't want me. And the worst part? She seemed to go out of her way to show me just how disappointed she was in me. One evening, I got home from school later than usual. Mom, Tom, and Adam were sitting at the dining table, eating what looked like a warm, homemade dinner. Mom looked up when I walked in, her eyes narrowing in that familiar, disapproving way. "You're late," she snapped. "No hello. No, how was your day?" "Just you're late." I opened my mouth to explain that I'd stayed behind to work on a project, but she cut me off before I could get a word out. "Your father used to do the same thing. Show up whenever he pleased. No sense of respect or responsibility," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I just stood there, stunned. My father. She hadn't brought him up in years. But now, it was like she wanted to remind me of how little she thought of him, and, by extension, me. Tom and Adam exchanged a glance, smirking. It became her favorite line, comparing me to my dad whenever she was upset with me. My dad had been out of our lives since I was little, and from the little I remembered, he wasn't exactly a bad guy. Sure, he wasn't perfect, but he'd never been cruel or careless the way she made him sound. But to her, he was the enemy, and I was the inevitable offspring of his flaws. One afternoon, I got a low grade on a math test. I'd studied, but math was never my strong suit, and I struggled with it. I walked home, dreading how she'd react, but hoping, maybe, she'd at least try to understand. She didn't. As soon as I showed her the test, she took one look and scoffed. "Of course, just like your father. Could never focus. Always thought he could skate by on charm instead of hard work." I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. She didn't know how hard I'd tried, how much I wanted to make her proud. But she'd already decided that I was nothing more than an echo of a man she despised. I tried to tell her that I'd done my best, that I'd work harder next time, but she just brushed me off and called Adam over. "Adam, honey, would you help me with the groceries?" she asked, her voice softening as she turned to him. "Unlike some people, you actually know how to focus." Adam shot me a triumphant grin and strolled over, grabbing the bags from her hands like he was some kind of hero. I watched, feeling the sting of being constantly overlooked, always a step behind. no matter what I did. Then there were the incidents. The little moments where she'd take their side without a second thought, no matter how obviously wrong they were. One Saturday, I was in my room, reading. Adam barged in without knocking, his usual smirk plastered on his face. "What's up, nerd?" he sneered, grabbing my book and flipping through the pages as if it were a joke. "Can you leave me alone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you gonna do about it?" he taunted, stepping closer. Before I could react, he shoved me hard, sending me stumbling back against my desk. My books and papers went flying. "What the hell, Adam?" I shouted, clenching my fists. "What's going on up there?" Mom's voice floated up from downstairs. She stormed up, her face already twisted in irritation. "He shoved me." Adam cried out before I could say a word. "I was just trying to talk to him, and he went nuts." Mom's gaze swung to me, full of disappointment. "Why do you always have to cause trouble?" she said, her voice low but sharp. "Why can't you just get along with Adam? He came in here and shoved me." I tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. "Stop making excuses," she said, brushing me off. "You should be grateful Adam even tries to include you. Maybe if you weren't so much like your father, things would be easier." It felt like a punch to the gut. She didn't even care about what had actually happened. Adam had learned that as long as he played the perfect son, he could do no wrong. And me? I was the problem child, the one she couldn't bring herself to like. As time passed, Adam's mocking escalated. He'd wait until no one was around to say things that would dig under my skin, things he knew would hurt. It was like he had this twisted need to remind me of my place in the house, beneath him. One day, I was working on a project in the living room when he walked by and kicked my backpack, spilling my supplies all over the floor. "Oops," he said, not even bothering to look back. "Guess you should be more careful, huh?" I gritted my teeth, picking up my things while he sauntered away like he'd done nothing wrong. I wanted to shout, to tell Mom, to make him pay, but I knew it was pointless. No matter what Adam did, Mom would take his side. Every time. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Mom was laughing, telling Tom about something stupid I'd done. I listened in, feeling my face burn as she ridiculed me. I didn't think it could hurt more, but then she said, "Honestly, he's so much like his father. It's like I'm raising him all over again." Tom chuckled and Adam chimed in, "Guess he'll end up a nobody too, huh?" They all laughed, a sound that stabbed me right in the chest. I felt like an intruder in my own life, surrounded by people who didn't want me, who saw me as some kind of burden or joke. It all boiled over on a Sunday afternoon. I was out in the yard, mowing the lawn like Tom had asked. I finished up, sweat pouring down my face, and went inside to get a drink. As I poured a glass of water, I noticed Adam lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Must be nice, sitting around while I do all the work," I muttered under my breath. He looked up, smirking. "What's the matter? You jealous, loser?" I ignored him and started walking upstairs, but he wasn't done. "Bet your dad was a loser too. Guess it runs in the family, huh?" That was it. I spun around, fists clenched. "Don't you dare talk about my dad," I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. Adam just laughed, unfazed. "What are you gonna do? Run crying to Mommy?" At that moment, Mom walked in, frowning at me. "What's going on here?" "Your little angel here is calling my dad a loser," I said, my voice tight. She looked at me like I was the one causing trouble. "Why do you always have to make everything a fight?" she said, exasperated. "Adam was probably just joking, and you took it too far." "He's never joking," I shouted, feeling the frustration and pain bubble up. "He's constantly making fun of me, and you just let him get away with it." Mom crossed her arms, her gaze cold. "Maybe if you stopped being so sensitive, you wouldn't feel like everyone's out to get you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was defending him again. She wasn't just ignoring what he'd done. She was turning it around, making it my fault. Adam grinned, his eyes glinting with satisfaction, knowing he'd won again. I felt a surge of rage, wanting to scream, to break something, to finally make her see what was happening. But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. She'd already made up her mind about me, and nothing I did would ever be enough. I stormed upstairs, slamming my door shut, feeling more alone than ever. I sat on my bed, the silence pressing down on me, suffocating. I was trapped, surrounded by people who didn't care about me, people who saw me as nothing more than a burden. In that moment, I realized something painful but undeniable. My own mother had chosen them over me. She'd made her decision, and I was no longer her son. Not in any way that mattered. It was only because of my grandparents that I didn't completely lose myself in that house. They lived a few towns away, and every time I visited, it felt like I could finally breathe. Unlike Mom and her new family, my grandparents actually cared. They saw me. In their home, I wasn't an outsider. I was their grandson. My paternal grandfather, William, was an ex-mechanic with a silver crew cut and rough hands, always smelling faintly of motor oil. He had a deep voice and a solid presence that made you feel safe, like nothing bad could happen as long as he was around. My grandmother, Margaret, was just as steady. She had this way of knowing exactly what I needed, even before I knew it myself. She was small, with graying hair and warm eyes that could cut through any wall I put up. They didn't pry, at least not at first, but they could tell something was wrong. On one of my first visits after Mom's marriage to Tom, they sat me down at the kitchen table. The smell of fresh-baked cookies filled the room, and Grandma slid a plate of them toward me, along with a glass of milk. "So," Grandpa began, his voice soft but probing, "how's everything at home?" I took a long drink of milk, buying time. How was I supposed to answer that? "It's fine," I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. Grandma reached over, placing her hand on mine. "We're here for you. You know that, right? You can tell us anything." The words caught in my throat, but then, suddenly, I couldn't stop. I told them everything about Mom's constant comparisons to Dad, the way she favored Adam, how she'd laugh at my expense. I even told them about Adam's relentless taunts, how he was the golden boy who could do no wrong, and how Mom always sided with him and Tom. Grandpa's face darkened as I spoke, his jaw clenched in a way I'd never seen before. Grandma's eyes filled with tears, but she just kept holding my hand, steady and warm, as I spilled everything. When I was finished, they sat there in silence, absorbing it all. Finally, Grandpa spoke, his voice thick with anger. "That's not right, son. You deserve better than that." It was such a simple statement, but it felt like he'd reached into my chest and steadied my heart. It was the first time in months that I felt like maybe I wasn't the problem, that maybe I deserved to be treated better. From then on, they made it clear that their door was always open to me, and I took them up on it. I spent as many weekends as I could at their house, and every time, they welcomed me with open arms. Grandma would have my favorite meals ready, and Grandpa would take me out to his old workshop, teaching me how to tinker with engines and repair tools. He'd let me rant while we worked, his steady presence letting me know that I was heard. One weekend, while I was staying over, Grandpa took me out back to the shed, where he kept his old, rusty pickup truck. He patted the hood with a fond grin. "You know, when you're ready to drive, this old beauty's yours if you want her," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes shining with pride. I stared at him, stunned. "You're serious?" He chuckled, crossing his arms. "Dead serious. She's rough around the edges, but she'll get you where you need to go. Besides, it's good to have something of your own, something that no one else can take away." I didn't have the words to express how much that meant to me. It wasn't just a truck. It was freedom, a way out, a sense of ownership over my life. Grandpa understood in a way that no one else did. The visits to my grandparents became my lifeline. In their house, I felt like a normal person again. They didn't make me feel like a burden, a shadow, or some unwanted reminder of my dad. They just loved me, simply and wholly, with no strings attached. One afternoon, while I was helping Grandma in the kitchen, she pulled out a worn photo album. She flipped through the pages, smiling at old photos of Dad as a kid. I'd seen pictures of him before, but seeing them in this context, in the warmth of my grandparents' kitchen, made it feel different, like I was getting to know the man he was, beyond Mom's bitterness. Grandma pointed to a picture of Dad, about my age, grinning at the camera with a baseball bat slung over his shoulder. "You look just like him," she said softly. I looked at her, surprised. "Mom doesn't think so." She sighed, a hint of sadness in her eyes. Your mother. She has her own wounds. But your father was a good man, despite what she might say. He had a big heart, just like you. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Never doubt that you're your own person, no matter what anyone says. It was like a weight lifted off my chest. For the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't just a reflection of my parents' mistakes. I was my own person, and that meant something. It meant everything. As high school went on, the difference between my life at my grandparents' and my life with Mom became more glaring. My grandparents made a point to be there for every school event, every milestone. They'd sit proudly in the front row at my games, clapping and cheering, no matter the score. Meanwhile, Mom, Tom, and Adam barely noticed my accomplishments. I'd tell them about a win or a project I'd worked hard on, and they'd just shrug it off, if they acknowledged it at all. When college applications came around, my grandparents were my biggest cheerleaders. Grandpa sat with me, going over essays and helping me research scholarships, while Grandma reminded me to take breaks, feeding me snacks and tea as I worked late into the night. One evening, as I sat at their dining table, surrounded by stacks of applications and essays, Grandpa leaned over, resting a hand on my shoulder. We want to help you with this, he said, his voice steady. Financially, I mean. We've been saving up, and we want to make sure you can go wherever you need to. I stared at him, stunned. Grandpa, I can't let you do that. College is expensive. He waved me off with a smile. We didn't save this money just to watch it sit in the bank. This is for you, kiddo. You deserve a real shot at a future. It felt surreal. Here were two people willing to sacrifice their own savings, just to make sure I could escape the hellhole I lived in. It was like they were giving me a key to a door I'd thought was locked forever. The day I got my acceptance letter was one of the happiest and most painful days of my life. I'd been accepted to a university in another state, a full scholarship covering part of the cost, with my grandparents covering the rest. I could finally leave. But when I showed the letter to Mom, she barely reacted. Oh, that's nice, she said, glancing at it for barely a second before turning back to Adam, who was yammering on about some new car Tom had promised him. I felt a pang in my chest, but I forced a smile. I didn't expect her to be thrilled, but her indifference was still a punch to the gut. All I wanted was for her to be proud, to show even a fraction of the support my grandparents had shown me. But I was foolish to expect that from her by now. That night, I packed up my acceptance letter, along with my emotions, and drove to my grandparents' house. When I showed them the letter, they were ecstatic, hugging me tightly, tears in their eyes. It was like they'd been accepted, too. And in a way, they were the reason I'd made it this far. On the day I left for college, my grandparents helped me load up the truck Grandpa had gifted me. As I was about to drive away, Grandpa pulled me into a tight hug, whispering in my ear, "We're always here for you, son. No matter where you go, this will always be your home." I hugged him back, swallowing the lump in my throat. Grandma hugged me too, her familiar scent filling my senses, grounding me. "Go make us proud," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And remember, you're loved." With one last look at the house that had become my refuge, I climbed into the truck, waved, and drove off, feeling a mix of excitement and sadness. I was finally free, finally on my way to building a life of my own. But as the miles stretched out behind me, I knew that no matter where I went, I'd carry a piece of my grandparents with me. They had given me a home when I thought I'd lost one, had shown me love when I thought I was unlovable. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was worth something. Graduating college was supposed to be a celebration, the beginning of my own life, free from the shadows of the past. But after the ceremony, as I stood in my cap and gown, I felt a familiar ache settle in. My mom wasn't there. She hadn't even asked about my graduation. She had no idea what it had taken for me to get here. The late nights, the hard work, and most importantly, the unwavering support of my grandparents. They were the only ones in the audience that day, cheering as if I were the first person to ever graduate. We celebrated at a small diner near campus. Grandpa ordered burgers, and Grandma, as usual, insisted on dessert to mark the occasion. She brought out a small box wrapped in silver paper and handed it to me, eyes twinkling with pride. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Just a little something for you," she said softly. I tore off the wrapping to reveal an old, leather-bound journal. "It was your father's," Grandpa explained, clearing his throat. "He used to write down his thoughts, his dreams. We thought, maybe you'd want it." I stared down at the journal, my heart swelling with emotions I couldn't name. For years, I'd heard nothing but negativity about my father. But here, in my hands, was a piece of him, a glimpse into who he truly was. I looked at my grandparents, both of them smiling at me with such warmth, and felt a sense of gratitude so deep it almost hurt. After graduation, I moved back in with them. There was no question of going anywhere else. Their home had always been a refuge, a place where I could be myself without fear of judgment or comparison. I found a job at a nearby office, the kind of entry-level position that didn't pay much but gave me a start. Every morning, Grandma packed my lunch and sent me off with a kiss on the cheek, while Grandpa gave me a firm pat on the back and a reminder to work hard and stay humble. Living with them as an adult brought new challenges and realizations. I noticed little things I hadn't as a teenager. The way Grandpa's hands shook slightly when he picked up a coffee cup, or how Grandma would pause halfway up the stairs to catch her breath. They were getting older, and it scared me more than I wanted to admit. They had been my constant, my safe harbor. I couldn't imagine a world without them in it. One evening, Grandpa pulled me aside in the garage, where we were working on his old truck. "I want you to know something," he said, his voice unusually serious. "Everything we have, it's yours. The house, the savings, it'll all go to you someday." I stared at him, taken aback. "Grandpa, I don't want to think about that. I'd rather just have you around." He chuckled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "We won't be around forever, kid. I just want you to know that we've thought of you. We want you to have a future, something to fall back on." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, my throat tight. The thought of losing them was unbearable, but I could see that he needed me to accept his words, to give him some peace of mind. A few years went by, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I was slowly moving up at work, and every evening, I'd come home to the comforting routine of dinners with my grandparents, listening to their stories and helping out around the house. It was simple, but it felt right. Then, one autumn, Grandma fell ill. It started as a cough, just a small annoyance, but it quickly escalated. By the time she saw a doctor, the diagnosis was grim, stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors gave us a few months at best. The news shattered us. Grandma had always been the heart of our family, the glue that held everything together. I couldn't imagine life without her warmth, her laughter, her quiet strength. I spent every moment I could by her side, talking to her, listening to her stories, savoring every second. Grandpa did the same, though I could see the strain wearing on him. He tried to stay strong for her, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. One evening, as I sat by her bedside, Grandma took my hand, her frail fingers cold and thin. "I want you to promise me something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Anything," I said, choking back tears. "Promise me you'll live your life. Don't let this world make you hard or bitter. You have a good heart, and that's worth more than anything. Don't forget that." I nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming down my face. She smiled weakly, her eyes filled with love and pride. "I love you, sweetheart," she whispered. "Always." A week later, she was gone. Her death left a void in our lives that nothing could fill. Grandpa and I tried to carry on, but everything felt different. The house was quieter, colder. Without Grandma's laughter, her warmth, it felt like a piece of our world had been ripped away. Grandpa and I leaned on each other, finding solace in shared grief. We'd sit in the living room in the evenings, talking about her, sharing memories, keeping her alive in our hearts. But I could see that he was struggling. He'd lost the love of his life, and no matter how much I tried to be there for him, I couldn't replace what he'd lost. A few months after her death, Grandpa's health began to decline rapidly. He'd always been strong, unbreakable, but now, he seemed to be fading. It was like he'd lost the will to fight. I tried everything. Took him to doctor's appointments, cooked his favorite meals, spent as much time with him as possible, but nothing seemed to help. One night, as we sat together in the living room, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness that broke my heart. "I miss her," he said simply. "I'm tired, kid. I think it's time for me to go." I held his hand, tears blurring my vision. "Grandpa, please." He gave me a sad smile, squeezing my hand gently. "You'll be okay. You're strong, just like your dad was. And remember, everything we did for you. Make us proud." A few weeks later, he passed away in his sleep. I was the one who found him, his face peaceful, as if he'd finally found the rest he'd been seeking. After the funeral, I was left alone in their house, surrounded by memories. The silence was overwhelming, the emptiness suffocating. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of them. Grandma's favorite chair by the window, Grandpa's tools neatly organized in the garage, the photo albums filled with snapshots of our life together. In their will, they left everything to me. The house, their savings, even Grandpa's old truck. It was more than I could have ever expected. A gift that gave me the chance to start a new life, to build something of my own. But it felt like a double-edged sword. This was the legacy they'd worked their whole lives to leave behind, and now it was mine to carry forward. I spent weeks sorting through their things, carefully packing away mementos, holding onto the pieces of them that I couldn't bear to part with. I found letters they'd written to each other, love notes tucked into old books, photographs from when they were young and full of dreams. Each discovery was a reminder of the love they'd shared, the life they'd built, and the love they'd given me. With the inheritance, I had options. I didn't have to stay in the small town where my memories felt like weights pulling me down. I could go anywhere, do anything. But leaving felt wrong, like I was abandoning them. I took some time to think, to let the grief settle, and eventually, I found a way to honor them while still moving forward. I renovated the house, keeping the familiar details but making it my own. I turned Grandpa's garage into a small workshop where I could tinker with projects, just like we used to do together. I set up a small garden out back in Grandma's memory, planting her favorite flowers, letting her spirit live on in the beauty she'd always loved. The inheritance allowed me to start my own business, something I'd always dreamed of but never thought possible. It was a small repair shop, nothing fancy, but it was mine. And every time I fixed something, every time I helped someone, I felt like I was keeping a piece of Grandpa with me. His lessons, his values, they were all woven into the work I did, into the life I was building. In the years that followed, I found peace in the life they'd given me. I built friendships, found love, and created a life that I knew would make them proud. The house became a place of joy and laughter again, a testament to the love and strength they'd instilled in me. I never stopped missing them, but I carried them with me in every choice I made, every step I took. Their legacy was more than just a house or a bank account. It was the love they'd shown me, the lessons they'd taught me, and the unwavering belief they'd had in my potential. They'd given me a foundation, a sense of belonging, and the courage to face the world on my own terms. And as I stood in the doorway of our home, looking out at the world before me, I knew that they were with me, guiding me forward every step of the way. After Grandma and Grandpa passed, I thought I was finally free of the tangled web that was my family drama. I had a good life now, a home, a job I loved, a few close friends who felt more like family than my own ever had. My life was peaceful, and I felt like I'd finally healed from the years of neglect and mistreatment. But then, one morning, everything changed. I was finishing up some work in my home office when I got a call from an unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something told me to answer this time. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice cautious. There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in years came through, rougher than I remembered but still unmistakable. "Hey, it's Adam." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Memories of his taunts, the smirks, the manipulation. It all came rushing back. He'd made my life hell, and now here he was, calling me out of nowhere. I wanted to hang up, but my curiosity got the best of me. "What do you want, Adam?" I said, my voice as flat as I could make it. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I wouldn't be calling if I didn't have to. I'm in a difficult situation. I lost my job, and well, Things have been hard. I got evicted, and I don't have anywhere else to go. I was hoping you'd let me crash with you for a bit, just until I get back on my feet." I almost laughed. Adam, the golden boy, the one who had everything handed to him, was now asking me for help. The irony was too rich. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly. "After all these years of treating me like dirt, you think I'm just going to open my door and let you in?" He was silent for a moment. "I know I wasn't always fair to you," he mumbled, sounding almost ashamed. But there was no apology, no real remorse. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "You weren't fair to me? That's putting it lightly, don't you think?" "Look, I don't need a lecture. All right?" he snapped, his old arrogance seeping through. "I just need a place to stay. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. Of course, to him, it was nothing. He hadn't been on the receiving end of his own cruelty, hadn't spent years trying to rebuild a life that his actions had tried to destroy. "I'm sorry, Adam, but the answer is no," I said firmly. "You can find somewhere else to stay. I can't help you." He let out a frustrated sigh. "Are you serious? We're family. I thought you'd be different by now, more forgiving." That stung. He was trying to make me feel guilty, to twist this around and make it my fault. But I wasn't the same person I'd been back then. I knew my worth now, and I knew that I didn't owe him anything. "I don't have to forgive you just because we're family," I replied coldly. "Family doesn't mean what you think it does, Adam. Not to me." I ended the call, my hands shaking. I hadn't realized how much strength it would take to stand up to him, to finally put my foot down. But as the silence settled around me, I felt a strange sense of relief. I'd done it. I'd protected myself, kept my boundaries intact, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of pride. But, of course, it didn't end there. Over the next few days, the calls started coming, first from unknown numbers, then from my mother. I ignored the first few, but eventually, I picked up, knowing I couldn't avoid her forever. The moment I said hello, she launched into a tirade. "How could you turn your back on your own brother?" she demanded, her voice shrill and accusatory. "Adam is going through a hard time, and you just shut him out? What kind of person does that?" I felt the anger bubbling up, but I kept my tone steady. "The kind of person who remembers everything he put me through, Mom. Or did you forget how he treated me all those years?" She scoffed, as if I were being unreasonable. "That was ages ago. You should have moved on by now. Adam has changed, and he needs his family. You have a house. You have room. You could help him if you wanted to." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I have room? That's funny, because I didn't hear you offering him a place to stay." There was a pause, and I could practically hear her bristle on the other end. "That's different. Tom and I, we have our own issues right now. We can't just take in another person. But you're alone. You have no one depending on you. It's your duty to help your brother." My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of anger and disbelief. My duty? Where was that sense of duty when he was tearing me down, making my life miserable? "You chose him every single time, Mom. And now you want me to just forget all of that and help him?" "He's your brother," she repeated stubbornly, as if that explained everything. "No, Mom," I said, my voice cold and final. "He's your son, and he's your responsibility, not mine." I hung up before she could respond, my heart racing. I knew that this wasn't over, that the family wouldn't just let it go. But I'd made my decision, and for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Over the next few weeks, the calls from family members poured in. My aunt, my cousins, even some old family friends. All of them tried to guilt me into helping Adam. They told me I was being selfish, that I was holding a grudge, that I was better than this. Each call was another reminder of just how little they understood me, of how little they cared about what I'd been through. One evening, I was sitting alone in my living room when my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Laura. She was one of the few family members I'd actually gotten along with, so I opened it, hoping she might actually understand. The message read, "Hey, I know you're going through a lot, but don't you think you're being a bit harsh? Adam's struggling, and he needs help. He's your brother. After all, family is supposed to stick together." I sighed, rubbing my temples. Even Laura didn't get it. I typed a reply, my fingers trembling with frustration. Laura, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't about family loyalty. It's about protecting myself. Adam never once apologized for the way he treated me. He's only reaching out now because he needs something. If he truly cared, he would have tried to make amends a long time ago. Her response came quickly. I get it, but sometimes you have to let go of the past. Holding on to grudges will only make you bitter. I clenched my jaw, feeling the familiar anger and frustration rise up again. This wasn't about bitterness. It was about survival. But explaining that to them was like talking to a wall. They couldn't see past the family label, couldn't understand that some wounds ran too deep to be ignored. In the end, I knew what I had to do. I stopped answering their calls, stopped responding to their messages. If they couldn't understand my decision, then that was on them. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into sacrificing my peace of mind. I'd worked too hard to build this life, to create a space where I felt safe and valued.